50 soldiers dead before dawn. Was this terror or the shadowy hand of global power at work? On the 29th of July, 2025, just before sunrise, an entire unit of Burkina Faso's armed forces was annihilated in a single, brutal ambush. No warning, no chance to fight back. Radios that should have raised the alarm fell eerily silent at the worst possible moment. The attack was over before help could even be imagined. A nation woke reeling. The grief was immediate, the fury just beneath. How could such a flawless strike happen so quickly, with no sign? Was this simply another act of extremist violence, or had foreign interests orchestrated something far more sinister? This is not a story of blame alone. The future of a nation, and perhaps the stability of an entire region, now hung in the balance. What happened that morning did more than claim lives. It fractured every assumption about safety, power, and autonomy in West Africa. Burkina Faso, once on the margins, was thrust into the harshest global spotlight. Look away, and you miss how a single, bloody dawn could redraw the lines of sovereignty across continents. The fallen are mourned, but the world waits for what comes next. A quest for truth, a battle for dignity, and the chance that this tragedy could ignite a movement nobody saw coming. But to truly understand the magnitude of this event, we must look beyond the headlines. Consider, for example, the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the 1960s. Lumumba, too, was a young, visionary leader who dared to defy foreign interests. His death did not merely end a life. It sent shockwaves through Africa and reshaped the continent's post-colonial trajectory. Is the tragedy in Burkina Faso another such moment? A spark that could change the course of history? In the days that followed, President Ibrahim Traoré refused to bow to fear or outside influence. Instead, he turned the nation's grief into a rallying cry for African self-reliance and unity. Why would a president turn his back on Western invitations only days before catastrophe? On the surface, it appears reckless, especially in a nation living under constant threat. But to grasp what truly unfolded in Burkina Faso, we must first examine the man at the eye of the storm, President Ibrahim Traoré. Traoré is young, fiercely resolute, and unwilling to bend to foreign influence. In the tense weeks before disaster, he flatly declined prominent invitations from Western leaders, including a personal appeal from Washington to attend a celebrated diplomatic gathering. To outsiders, his refusal looked like a snub. To many citizens, it was a bold stand, proof that Burkina Faso would not be swayed by grand gestures or subtle forms of pressure from the West. Inside the country, skepticism toward Western motives was intensifying. People in crowded markets and quiet neighborhoods alike saw these diplomatic overtures as more than friendly offers. They seemed like veiled attempts at control. Many believed such invitations came with hidden strings, a tactic to keep Burkina Faso dependent or to pressure its leaders in moments of uncertainty. Then, just days after Traoré dismissed these approaches, disaster struck. In the pale dawn, a coordinated attack ripped through a military base in the east, leaving scores of soldiers dead. The ambush was precise. Communication lines went eerily silent. The public sensed this was no random act. It was too calculated, too timely. Was this another act of terror? Or a blood-soaked warning for a president who dared to defy foreign powers? Across radio broadcasts, busy streets, and online forums, suspicion spread. The timing was too sharp to dismiss. Many began to view the attack as direct retribution for Traoré's refusal to yield to outside pressure. To put this into perspective, recall the 1953 coup in Iran when Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh was overthrown after challenging Western oil interests. The official story was chaos and instability, but deeper investigation later revealed the hidden hand of global power at play. Burkina Faso's situation echoes this historical pattern, where national assertion meets covert retaliation. Burkina Faso's reality is precarious and strategic. Landlocked and surrounded by instability, its government faces threats both from militant factions and from the ambitions of global power blocs. Traoré's determination to resist Western influence turns every choice into a high-stakes gamble, every tragedy into a potential trigger for far larger conflicts. This is not just the story of one leader or one crisis. It is about the meaning of sovereignty in a world where alliances are as dangerous as they are necessary. To see only the surface is to overlook the deeper motives and the magnitude of the threat now confronting Burkina Faso. As grief boiled into outrage, Traoré and his people stood at a crossroads. Would they surrender to intimidation or turn their tragedy into the foundation of a new vision for power and collective unity? But the shock of the attack would not paralyze the nation. Instead, it would spark a movement that neither allies nor adversaries saw coming. What does it look like when a nation swears never to outsource its survival again? In the aftermath of the ambush, President Ibrahim Traoré made a vow. Burkina Faso's security would rest in its own hands, no longer dependent on outsiders. He set in motion a complete overhaul, launching a defense industry built from the ground up. Young engineers just out of university joined veteran technicians to craft drones, machines born entirely on Burkinabe soil, from design to deployment. Inside the fortified complex in Ouagadougou, the atmosphere crackled with urgency. Armed checkpoints, vigilant eyes, and strict protocols protected every secret. With each drone that lifted into the Sahel sky, confidence swelled. Never again will Burkina Faso be caught unprepared. The words became a daily pledge, echoed from the assembly lines to the highest command posts. For a sense of the scale, think of Israel's development of its own arms industry in the 1950s and 60s. Isolated by regional hostility and lacking foreign support, Israel invested in indigenous defense production. Over decades, this led to the creation of the Merkava tank and the Iron Dome missile defense system, technologies that now define its military independence. Burkina Faso is at the beginning of a similar journey, determined to turn adversity into self-made strength. Yet, Traoré's vision was not isolationist. He invited Russian military advisors, not as mercenaries, but as instructors. They shared advanced tactics for drone warfare, training local forces to anticipate and counter unpredictable threats. The collaboration was clear-eyed, a partnership on Burkina Faso's terms, built on mutual respect, not subservience. Momentum spread quickly. Soon, regional drills began, with soldiers from Mali and Niger joining their Burkinabe counterparts. They synchronized strategies, shared logistics, and rehearsed rapid response maneuvers. For the first time, a united West African defense bloc emerged, not as stand-ins for distant powers, but as the architects of their own security. From these alliances, a new African doctrine of retaliation took shape. The strategy blended cutting-edge technology, classic guerrilla tactics, and grassroots civilian mobilization. Communities learned to spot danger. Engineers innovated under pressure. Soldiers fought as one. It was radical self-reliance, proving to the world that Africa could defend itself on its own terms. But the stakes reached beyond the battlefield. The future balance of power was uncertain. Would the next generation inherit true autonomy or remain bound to old chains? Each drone, every joint operation, was a step toward sovereignty. A legacy built not on foreign favors, but on the ingenuity and determination of the people. This revolution was about more than weapons. Across Burkina Faso, society mobilized, schools, towns, and families uniting under a new vision of national defense. What did it mean to protect a nation? Day by day, the answer was being rewritten. But a movement of this scale does not go unnoticed. As Burkina Faso forged its new path, old powers began to take countermeasures, threatening to upend everything Traoré's revolution had built. Can the death of 50 ignite a revolution with the power to cross borders? In Burkina Faso, the answer is yes. The proof is not only in rising numbers, but in a spirit the world cannot dismiss. Within 10 days, enlistment surges by nearly 2/3. Recruitment centers overflow. For the first time, women line up alongside men, demanding the right to fight. Grief transforms into a tidal movement, uniting old and young, rich and poor, across every faith. President Traoré responds with Operation Compelled, a defense plan unlike any before. Artificial intelligence now watches the borders. Across cities and villages, new preparedness centers train ordinary people for crisis. Defense is no longer only the military's job, it is a national calling. $300 million, once destined for development aid, are redirected to fuel homegrown military innovation. Local engineers and students join forces determined to build new defense tools and end dependence on foreign handouts. The goal? Never again to fight with outdated weapons or someone else's technology. For context, consider South Korea's transformation after the Korean War. Faced with existential threats and little external support, it invested heavily in domestic technology and defense, eventually growing into a technological powerhouse. Burkina Faso is laying the foundation for a similar leap, with local innovation and determination as its driving force. Civilian patrols fan out through city streets and remote fields, working hand in hand with police and soldiers. Meanwhile, a cultural wave surges. Murals of fallen heroes cover public walls, and new songs of resistance ring through markets and churches. Memorials unite Muslims, Christians, and traditionalists, all vowing to defend the land they share. Online, the movement spreads like wildfire. Hashtags sweep across West Africa, carrying the story into millions of homes. Yet, amid the solidarity, the silence from the African Union stings. Many Burkinabe feel abandoned, fueling a deeper hunger for self-reliance and for unity on their own terms. Diplomatic shockwaves ripple far beyond Ouagadougou. Burkina Faso forges a historic defense pact with Mali and Niger. The Sahel Security and Sovereignty Pact is born, a vow of joint defense, intelligence sharing, and regional arms production. This is more than a treaty. It is a declaration of African-led, African-controlled security. The pact creates a rapid response force, new air bases, and patrols that cross old colonial borders. For the first time, the region speaks as one on defense. But the stakes could not be higher. If this experiment fails, hopes for true sovereignty may die. If it succeeds, Africa could seize a new place in world affairs. To make concrete the risks and rewards, recall the Warsaw Pact of the Cold War era. Eastern European nations united for mutual defense, seeking to balance Western power. While ultimately constrained by the Soviet Union's dominance, the pact did succeed in shaping the security architecture of an entire region for decades. The Sahel Security and Sovereignty Pact, though different in context, aspires to a similar game-changing impact. Only this time, the goal is genuine African independence. Unity is rising at home, and alliances are taking shape abroad. Now, a new question looms. How will global powers respond to this surge of defiance? And what future will Africa claim for itself? But even as Burkina Faso and its allies rally, powerful interests abroad begin to take notice. The next moves from Paris, Washington, and Moscow could decide whether this revolution burns bright or is smothered before it truly begins. Is this the birth of a new African order, or the spark that triggers retaliation from the old guard? The world is transfixed as Burkina Faso, led by President Ibrahim Traoré, tears up the inherited playbook. Traoré rejects all attempts at co-option, demanding that every partnership serve national sovereignty above all. He is unmoved by praise, unswayed by threats. Every deal is conditional, every alliance forged on his terms alone. Western leaders scramble to recalibrate. Newsrooms dissect Traoré's every move, warning of dangers and hidden motives. Yet across Africa, the Burkina model is gaining ground. Neighbors are sending secret envoys, searching for the formula behind this surge of self-determination. From Paris and London to Washington, anxiety festers. Analysts predict that as many as 7 other African countries could soon shift their allegiances or break from traditional power brokers within 5 years. The Traoré effect is no longer theory. It is a storm gathering on the horizon, unsettling those who once claimed Africa as theirs to shape. But the most profound transformation is unfolding at home. Enrollment in national service has doubled. Volunteer brigades, once mere symbols, are now vital to defense. Students, artisans, and market traders all see themselves as sentinels. Security is no longer just a uniform or a government department. It is a living, daily pact, stitched together by patriotism and collective memory. Burkina Faso's story is evolving into a global case study. Where others might have buckled under pressure, the nation has made crisis a crucible for renewal. Rather than bowing to despair or outside dictates, Burkina Faso has turned its wounds into a movement for dignity and its vulnerability into a launchpad for innovation. To illustrate this, consider Finland's response to the Winter War of 1939. Facing invasion by a larger power, Finland mobilized both its citizens and its resources, developing homegrown tactics and weapons. The spirit of sisu, unbreakable determination, became a national ethos, one that allowed Finland to survive and maintain its sovereignty. Burkina Faso's current struggle echoes that same resilience. Yet danger shadows every step. International isolation could loom if powerful nations decide to tighten the screws. Economic retaliation, sanctions, suspended aid, or trade blockades could strike hard. Shadow wars, fought through proxies or disinformation, may escalate as threatened interests seek to sabotage this fragile experiment. Still, the lessons are unmistakable. True sovereignty requires unity and technological independence. Real security cannot be outsourced or imported. It must be woven from the identity, culture, and daily resolve of the people themselves. Practical steps are emerging from this turmoil. Local universities are launching new engineering programs focused on defense innovation. Community watch groups, once informal, are now formally trained in early warning and crisis response. Small businesses are pivoting to supply the new defense sector, creating jobs and expertise that will long outlast the present crisis. So the question lingers, in moments of crisis, do we retreat into old habits or risk everything in pursuit of a future we define for ourselves? For Africa and for all who value freedom, that is the crossroads we now face. But the path ahead is anything but certain. As the pressure mounts, Traoré's government must navigate not only foreign threats, but the cracks and hopes within its own society. Africa refuses to kneel. Will you stand with those who choose dignity over dependency? In Burkina Faso, this is not just a headline. It is a turning point. Where fear might have crushed hope, a new vision is taking root. The deaths of 50 soldiers did not shatter the nation. Instead, their sacrifice became a spark, igniting a continent-wide demand for sovereignty, expressed not in rhetoric, but in decisive action. President Ibrahim Traoré and his people did not beg for pity or rescue from abroad. They built. They innovated. They transformed their own resources, their own knowledge, and their collective will into a new security doctrine, one beholden to no outside force, submissive to no former master. To make this real, think of the practical steps already seen, the establishment of the National Defense Academy in Ouagadougou, where young cadets are trained not only in tactics, but in the history of African resistance. The rollout of the Sahel Shield border monitoring system, using locally developed software, has already led to the interception of 2 attempted attacks since the tragedy. Radio campaigns now teach every citizen, from school children to elders, how to report suspicious activity, turning every household into a node in the nation's security network. This is the real measure of sovereignty, not just for Burkina Faso, but for anyone who dreams of standing tall on their own land. Is dignity worth more than convenience? Is freedom worth more than foreign aid tied to hidden demands? These are not theoretical questions. They are the choices shaping Africa's future. If the world expects Africa to remain a pawn, this new movement answers with unity and defiance. Across borders, alliances rise not from fear, but from shared ambition. Regional innovation hubs, indigenous military academies, and grassroots support are turning what once seemed impossible into reality. But the stakes are not only national. Each of us, in our own way, faces this test. When crisis arrives, do we surrender our agency to distant powers, or discover new strength within our communities? The story of Burkina Faso invites us all to witness, to reflect, and perhaps to stand with those who choose the harder, nobler path. Africa's refusal to bow is both a promise and a warning. The age of dependency is ending. The era of self-determination is rising. What will you do with this knowledge? How will you stand? For yourself, for your community, for the principles of dignity and sovereignty? The answer does not begin in palaces or embassies, but in the quiet resolve of people who have lost much and still choose to rise. In closing, recall that every revolution in history, whether the American Revolution, the Indian independence struggle, or the anti-apartheid movement, began with a moment when ordinary people refused to accept the status quo. Burkina Faso's tragedy is such a moment. It is not just a national reckoning, but an open question to the world. Who will claim their future, and on what terms? Perhaps, years from now, historians will look back on this dawn not as the day Burkina Faso lost 50 soldiers, but as the dawn when an entire continent stood up and declared, never again. And as this story unfolds, the world must decide, will it support the right of nations to define their own destinies, or will it cling to the fading shadows of control? The choice, as always, belongs to those bold enough to make history. The debt of tragedy is not closed, but the first payment has been made, not with surrender, but with a vision for the future forged in courage.